Hi, I'm Victoria Ballou, and welcome to my YouTube channel. We're going to talk about synchronicity right now. It's something that happens to us every day, probably, but we only tend to recognize the really big synchronicitous moments. So I'm going to teach you how to recognize them, and I'm going to share with you why they are so important. Synchronicity. When you synchronize something, that means there are two things working in conjunction, which come together like gears in a sort of way that relate to each other. But with synchronicity, when it happens in our lives, it tends to be things that are completely unexpected, uncanny pairings of moments that you cannot explain. And that's where the magic comes in. That's where things get really exciting. And I want to give you a couple of examples because I know that you've had this happen in your life a lot and have noticed it. So let me give you an example in my own life so that you will be able to relate to what I'm saying and you can begin thinking about your own moments when this has happened. Just a couple of days ago, I was flying home from visiting a friend and was at an airport. While I was waiting for my flight, someone's cell phone kept ringing, and several times it would ring, and it was always the same ringtone that would come up. And what that ringtone was the beginning notes of the theme from that famous movie, The Godfather. I'm going to play those opening notes for you right now so that you can remember. Most everybody's heard this, but in case you haven't, here it is. Okay, beautiful, beautiful. And yet I heard this about 4 times within a 2-minute period because someone's cell phone kept ringing before he put it on mute. And it was interesting. I hadn't heard the music in a very long time. Got on my flight, got home safely. The next morning, my husband was coming into the kitchen and he was humming that theme song. And I looked at him and I said, "Why are you humming that tune?" Well, actually, he kind of whistles. He whistles really well, and he was whistling that tune. And I said, "Did you hear that on the radio? Where did that come from?" And he looked at me and he said, "I have no idea." That is synchronicity. That is an example of synchronicity. I'm hearing it in the airport 1,500 miles away, and then the very next morning, my husband is whistling this tune. He doesn't know why. I don't know why I'm hearing this the day before. And it allows me, that moment allowed me to pause and think, okay, what is the connection here? Because what are the chances that that would happen? I mean, that's what we have to ask ourselves when synchronicity occurs is, why did this happen? Well, sometimes there's a really obvious reason, in my opinion, and sometimes there really isn't. It could be something big or it could be something rather small. It could be something specific or something general. This is my definition of it after recognizing over decades of this happening and wanting to understand why. It's always my quest to understand things, metaphysical things that I don't understand. I'm always seeking the answers to it. And that is what I have come to understand about synchronicity. And so, in this particular situation, I just simply have taken this to recognize the deep connection that my husband and I have. And that because this entered in, that theme music entered into my psychic space in a way that I thought, oh, what a beautiful song. This is, what beautiful notes I'm hearing here. And it became incorporated into my psychic field that day. My husband picked up on it because I believe that we have this very deep connection. And he began whistling this tune without me ever mentioning to him that I had heard the music just the day before, until after I had heard him whistle it. And then I told him about the synchronicity. That is a perfect example of it. I know that you've had synchronicity happen in your life. And again, it's usually the big moments that you remember. But once you begin tuning in, once you expand, broaden your awareness of what is going on around you, you will come to recognize that synchronicity happens almost on a daily basis to you. It is allowing yourself to tune into these aspects that cause this to happen. And by tuning in to these synchronicity moments, again, whether they're big or small, it allows you to see the connection, the matrix of how everything really is connected. And we're all so busy in our lives today, and we got very distracted consciously with all the technology in our lives. And I love technology. So please understand that what I'm suggesting here is that you just allow that extra sensory, that super sensory aspect of you to come into play, because that is just as important as what we are focused on in our conscious lives. It can create a much richer, deeper experience for us on a daily basis. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to focus on it. Just be aware of it. When things begin happening, just be aware of it. And that allows you to get that broader expansion. I'll give you one more example. And this was a much bigger example for me personally. In June of 2020, I published my very first fiction book, and it's an urban fantasy book called The Hand Dealt. It's part of an urban fantasy series I am writing called The Tarot Legacies. The very first book, though, I published in June 2020. It was actually June 21st of 2020. And by some incredible, again, unexplainable way, I had a friend tell me that she had found a book that my great aunt, Gertrude Beasley, had written. And it was actually quite a scandalous, controversial book that ended up getting banned and burned in London. And it was really, actually, that's another story. It was called My First 30 Years by Gertrude Beasley, if any of you are interested in that. But a friend of mine called me about 2 weeks after my first book, The Hand Dealt, was published. And she was so excited, she couldn't sit still. And she said, "Do you know, in your great aunt's book, that on the last page of her book, she mentions the date, which was June 21st, 1920. I had actually unknowingly published my book 100 years to the day from my great aunt's book when she mentions the date in her book. The synchronicity of this, the exact date 100 years later, was to me a sign that I needed to continue writing my fiction series, that I needed to continue focusing on what I was doing with my writing, which I love doing so much. But the synchronicity of those two completely, seemingly unrelated aspects coming into my life and coming together at that moment was a very big synchronicitous moment to me. And so what I am asking you to do is to think about those moments in your life and begin to take notice of them when they happen. And then ask yourself, what is the message that I'm getting from this happening? These things do happen to us. You know, it's the whole question of, is it free will or is it fate? I believe it's both, that we do absolutely have free will, but sometimes fate intervenes, destiny comes and gives us a little poke and says, pay attention here. And it just gives us this little nudge to let us know when we're on the right path of something. And that's exactly what I think synchronicity is. And I bumped a card as I was talking. So to wrap this up, I'm going to pull this card. Wow, look, magic. This is the perfect card because that's what synchronicity is. It's magic that happens in our daily lives. And by the way, this beautiful oracle card comes from this extraordinary deck called Supra, the hidden meaning of an oracle, the hidden path of an oracle. I love this book so much. I love this deck so much. But here, I pulled the magic card. It kind of hopped up into my hand earlier, and that's actually what synchronicity is. It's ancient science in modern practice, and I hope you're able to recognize this, put it to use in your life. Let me know in the comments of your synchronicitous moments and what you learned from them. It's an awareness that you will always appreciate once you begin tuning in.